Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the second in our series of Your Digital Life. The title of today's webinar is Online Risks and Safeguarding. Please be aware that we are recording this, and if you do wish to ask a question within the chat, please do so, and be aware that we will use your name. It gives me great pleasure to introduce today's panel. First of all, my colleague Magnus Cowie. He's got 35 years of education experience in college leadership, safeguarding. He's a computer scientist by trade. He's a school inspector, and he has an MEd. My other colleague, Gough, has got 22 years of education experience. Recent qualifications include Advanced Safeguarding Level 3, Common Sense Behaviour Educator, Online Safety, Psychological First Aid, and he has a lot of experience as, in a previous profession, he was a behavioural manager of pupil referral unit, and he also has an MEd. And myself, Duncan Ogilvie, the junior of the bunch with only 18 years of experience, Common Sense Media Educator, Educare Safeguarding Schools, and an MA in Digital Education. Today's format is, as such, we're going to be covering 4 different aspects before we get on to the questions. I'm going to introduce an online risk survey that we did with our pupils last term. Mr. Cowie is going to address how we safeguard within the college. That's a proactive approach. Mr. Gough is then going to deal with child protection, how we deal with a variety of cases within the college. And I'm going to offer some parental support, as I did do in the last webinar. We're then going to answer a series of questions, which people have already fielded. So without further ado, we'll go on to the surveys. And I'm going to talk about the survey results in terms of the risks. So we asked pupils about online risks. We asked them about their perceptions of risk. And I'm going to introduce 2 terms which hopefully throughout the series of the webinar we become more familiar with. So unintended victims and the digital tattoo. So first of all, thank you to those parents that responded to the questionnaire, both prior to the last webinar and this one. And as we can see, there are a number of perceived risks from parents in terms of interactions online. And those range from mental health to the content that the pupils are actually watching. The impacts on their physical health, the perceived risk of screen time, the impact on their relationship, and obviously people have raised concerns about privacy and security as well as interaction with strangers. So we're going to aim to cover those throughout today's webinar. In terms of we did a senior school and a prep school survey, and in terms of our senior school, you can see here the key themes of the risk. And we actually asked the pupils their behavioural tips as well. So I'm just going to cover very quickly the top 3. So in senior school, they see the biggest risk to be personal data and privacy information that would be extracted, security to their data, and the third biggest risk they felt was online bullying. Now, in terms of behavioural tips, it was quite interesting. They were very, very knowledgeable, and they felt that there were a number of different ways that people could use online environments safely and responsibly. There was a number of different strategies in place to protect their passwords, and there was also a number of different themes that run across wellbeing and the pastoral element in college in terms of being kind and being respectful online. There are obviously other elements to this, but that is a brief overview. In our prep school, we asked the top end of the prep school, years 6, 7, and 8, and really what I wanted to identify here was some of the common apps. So things like Roblox, Discord, TikTok, Omegle, Twitter, Snapchat, Facebook. These were a number of different apps which pupils felt that were potentially risky sites to go on. Really, really interesting was the proportion of pupils who didn't feel that they were at risk and their friends were at risk. with the activities they had online. And I see that as a real positive in terms of what we've done with wellbeing within the college as well. And I wanted to reassure parents the fact that we are doing a significant amount in terms of our wellbeing and our education in terms of online risks. And these were sort of categorised in terms of years 6, 7 and 8 and what their perceptions were of the biggest sort of risks or inappropriate behaviour. And you can see that the younger year groups, in terms of swearing or potentially watching something that wasn't age appropriate, moving through to potentially cyberbullying, some unkindness online, through to at the top end of the prep school where the sort of 12, 13-year-olds were starting to feel that their friends were perhaps watching and looking at inappropriate images. So that leads me on to two terms that I said I would define clearly at the top end, and that is the unintended victim. And obviously, those are the pupils who unintentionally are going onto online sites and become victims of either inappropriate images or get into conversations with strangers. Again, we're going to cover this into more detail. And the other part of it is the digital tattoo. So inappropriate images they look at, and perhaps they start to sext or take images of themselves and share those. So we're going to cover those in more detail throughout the webinar. I'm going to pass over now to my colleague, to Magnus Cowie, and he is going to talk about how we safeguard throughout the college.
Thank you, Mr. Ogilvie. So looking at this, I've used 4 P's here that I will talk around. At the heart of this is our pupils, though. And the purpose of my session with you is to give you information on and confidence in our safeguarding measures. And I'm speaking within my capacity as the college designated safeguarding lead. And that role entails establishing and maintaining a culture of care across the college so our pupils feel safe and protected from any form of abuse. It is going to be the online category we look at a bit more in today, but it is really any form of abuse. Now, as you'll know from the letter out from the Master, a recent inspection team from Gough has visited us, and the team there looked at safeguarding because it's one of the most important features of any school, and it did identify safeguarding as the golden thread that runs through the college. We received a commendation for the unstinting commitment to safeguarding across the whole college, and were held up as a beacon school as an example of best practice to schools internationally. Now, very proud of this, and such praise from any inspection body, and I've served on many, is rare. I'd like to make a distinction to you in terms. We use safeguarding to cover the framework provided to reduce the risk of harm and embed a culture of care for all. We use the term child protection as cases of actual, suspected, or reported abuse and how we respond to those. Having both in place means we are being proactive in our safeguarding measures, and we are reacting appropriately in terms of our child protection responses to individual cases. Now, in an ideal world, our focus would be solely on safeguarding, and there wouldn't be any child protection, and there'd be no children coming to harm, either online or in person. But sadly, we are not in that world, and the virtual world is certainly not like that. So it is important for us to look at the other P's there, and the next one is people. And in the people overseeing our safeguarding is myself as DSL, Mr. Gough as Deputy DSL, and Mrs. Sirinong as the Head of Human Resources. And we meet every half term and look at matters relating to safeguarding in terms of policy reviews and compliance, training planning, briefings for staff, pupils, parents, planning our communications with all, and in case reviews, looking at cases, our effectiveness in managing those, our recommended actions, and what can we learn moving forward, so that we are looking to learn and we're looking to respond in a supportive manner to give confidence to all concerned. The Master, heads of schools, fully briefed, termly report also provided to the College Council. So from the very top, there is clarity in our responses and clarity in our forward planning. Clear communication is essential in such important matters. Any pupil concerns, be it pre-prep, prep, or senior school, can help support the children, support the staff, support the parents, and direct our training so our staff are confident in dealing with a variety of situations. Added to that, since COVID, we've also operated fortnightly meetings, monitoring online incidents as people spend more time online. Inevitably, they are taking more risks online, and we have to be more vigilant in that. And Mr. Ogilvie has joined us, and every 2 weeks we look at what's happened online that might be a concern and what's an appropriate response. And Mr. Gough will go over some examples of that later. Occasionally, we're also joined by Mr. Lee, the IT operations manager, to look at the overall management of our IT infrastructure here, and any filtering we need to put in place, and any college-wide restrictions that we would run. Next, in terms of policy, we have to have a robust policy in place, given a clear framework for action, following the law of the land and focusing on the welfare of the pupil. 15 pages available on the website if you want a good read, giving legal guidance, outlining the training provided to staff, to volunteers, to visitors, to pupils as well, the responsibilities of key staff, myself, Mr. Gough, the Master, and other staff who play key parts in safeguarding, e-safety, important part in normal times, safer recruitment, to make sure that our recruitment measures are robust and our induction of staff is thorough, and also in managing allegations and complaints, so our response is appropriate. There's a lot to cover there, and as I say, in the 15 pages, it is extremely thorough, but it's not enough to cope with the COVID-19 online delivery. We needed to add an online appendix there so that our overall framework did not change. We were still consistent in our support, but it was updated to deal with the virtual world and greater amount of time online, enabling us to be flexible in our response, but confident that there was clear direction that had been legally checked. Moving on to process next, putting the policy into action. So when we do have a serious concern over the well-being of pupils, it will be communicated to Mr. Gough or me, and our action will be directed by what's in the best interests of the child. Taking swift action, involving all parties that are relevant at that time. So it may involve head of the health centre, it may involve the college counsellor, it will depend on the context. And we'll look at, is this a case in isolation, or is it a pattern of behaviour that we need to attend to? We need to put training in place. We need to take an appropriate long-term response to reduce risk to our pupils. And we want that response to be effective for the individual and proactive in terms of their peers, our staff, and you, the parents, so that you have the necessary information to work with us to keep your children safe. So looking at that, the purpose of this whistle-stop tour on safeguarding was to give you information on and confidence in our approach to safeguarding. I hope it has, and I'd be very happy to answer any questions you have later after Mr. Gough goes through how some cases have occurred and how we have responded, guided by our safeguarding framework. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I am going to be quite quick because I'd like us to get to the Q&A where real questions and real answers can be done and given. We had a case where prep school age pupils used an app called Omegle and came across very upsetting images. And one of those pupils did communicate to their parents, and as a result, we were alerted. And with that, the pastoral staff that are in the school are able to care and support those pupils. It was during online learning, and of course, the dialogue with the parents is what matters, and the parents of all the pupils involved were obviously involved in the discussion and giving the pupils the necessary support. We all know the risks online, or rather it's such a minefield. Is quite worrying for parents. I'm a parent. I'm very worried for my 4- and 7-year-old already. So this is why it's so important to have conversation around what they're using and involve and making sure you are aware of what they're using. And for example, one thing that is all too common now is sending inappropriate images, commonly referred to as sexting. And this does happen. It's obviously going to have huge implications for that digital tattoo, which Mr. Ogilvie mentioned. But what is the biggest risk is the risk to bullying online and how vulnerable someone is with that action, which we all know is all too easy to do with a click of a button. So moving on, we'll move on to the Q&A. Mr. Ogilvie is going to talk about some of the ways of reducing the risk online. As I said, I think conversation with the pupils, monitoring them, changes in behaviour can be a sign. I know one of the questions is about chat groups and how toxic they are. Again, why are our young choosing to speak like this, and do they know what the language is that they're using, and would they say it in an open space rather than online? That is the kind of conversation we should be having as parents with our young pupils. I'm gonna move on to Mr. Ogilvie because I'm eager to answer the questions that have come through that are really good. Okay.
Thanks very much, Mr. Gough. So I'm just going to run through some parental support apps, as well as different websites and some ongoing support, which I have mentioned before, but it would be good to bring up again. We had a meeting just last week with a gentleman called Jonathan Taylor, who I'll allude to in a minute, and he shared with us his online safety top apps. This will come out following the webinar. But what I really like about this is the apps which he considers to be safe, but to monitor, apps which he thinks you should always monitor and you must stick to the age, and apps that he feels are very unsafe if are being underage or used underage. So it's interesting that Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, the kind of top ones there, which a lot of our pupils alluded to, are safe, but really do need to be monitored. But perhaps some of the things that you're not so familiar with, YOLO, Melon, Mixer, and Peaks, I would definitely suggest having a look at these apps yourself, being aware of them, and obviously monitoring those and trying to establish if they're being used underage. And you can see Omegle is on there as well. And these are things that we want to not scare people with, but raise that awareness of, and obviously to have a greater conversation piece. Two websites that I would thoroughly suggest. We've got Online Safety for Schools, which is Jonathan Taylor, who I've just alluded to, and Leonie Smith. She's actually the cyber safety lady. And by this, we cover it from the UK angle, and Leonie Smith is an Australian lady. Lots of information on their sites, lots of videos, interviews, podcasts as well. Absolutely fantastic for parents. I'll mention Common Sense Media. As you know, we are very, very keen on Common Sense Media here at MCM. And if you haven't done, please do go on there. Please do join. There's an absolute host of information which is regularly updated for parents. And the last thing, really, just to mention, if you feel as though things are getting out of control and you really do need to put or do need to clamp down, then, as I said last time, a conversation piece around screen time. I would definitely suggest family sharing with iOS, and it's something that families should be open about. And things like network control as well. That is a good way of seeing what's going through the network, and that can obviously be another catch. So we're going to move on to the questions now. And that is going to be right after I've forgotten this, the book suggestions. So there's 3 books on there that I mentioned last time. A new book has been brought to my attention, which is called Scroll Zombies, which is 5 steps towards digital balance. This has only just been released as well. And the good thing that I like about it is it recognizes the problem, but what it is doing is giving people solutions, like the Tech Solutions book as well. So we're here to continue that conversation, to continue that dialogue. But without further ado, we're going to go over to some questions. The first question, I'm going to head over to Mr. Gough. Obviously, he's got more of a specialism in the prep school. And this is from the parent of a 6-year-old. How to avoid our child to access inappropriate websites. So over to you, Mr. Gough. What would your suggestion be for that?
So, well, clearly privacy settings is really important, and Mr. Ogilvie is very good at knowing where you can access that or how to do that. I think what worries me is the time that they're unsupervised, especially younger years. I'm hearing worrying stories of sort of 10, 11, 12-year-olds being up till 11 at night. And it worries me what they're watching, what they're accessing. That's so important to be aware of. You own that device. You have bought that device for your young child. You are entitled, actually. They may claim privacy. Why are you invading my privacy? But when it comes to being online, using this powerful tool at a young age, you have every right to be asking them. Obviously, how you do that and how you build that relationship around the device is really important. They will come across, this is the unintended victim or unintended exploitation. They will come across websites. I was in a lesson today, and a year 8 girl was just telling another year 8 girl about blocking her camera, and she was explaining why, because there are things like QR codes which turn on your camera straight away, and they can put you at risk. I don't want to alarm you, but actually that is a potential risk. So that's why, for me as a parent, I wouldn't want my younger children being in their bedroom with a device, for an example, because I feel like I can't protect them there. It's about safety, ultimately, when they're using their devices. So it's about being aware, and hopefully the conversation relationship you have with your kids, they will immediately flag up that untoward website they've been on or anything they've seen that's harmful. And that's the key, really. Okay.
Thanks, Mr. Gough. Just going to head over to Mr. Cowie for the next question, which again is from a younger, for younger pupils. And the question came from a parent of a 6 and a 10-year-old, and they asked, where can we get a list of safe games or educational games that they can play together amongst their friends and be online? So they want to be online because they appreciate it's an important part of interactions. especially in lockdown. However, where can they get that safe list from?
Thank you, Mr. Ogilvie. Really good question, this, because friends online and virtual friends online are not always who they claim to be. And there's been lots of tragic cases that have seen that. So it is a very good point. And please, as parents, you are vigilant on that. In terms of sites that will help you guide your pupils toward having fun with friends online and avoiding risks online, Common Sense Media is an excellent source of guidance within this. As I talked earlier about our safeguarding policy and the training to staff, we actually directed our staff this year toward Common Sense Media because we saw it being so valuable to them for being briefed on how to respond to risks in the online world and how to be able to give guidance to pupils so that they could make the right decisions. As Mr. Ogilvie mentioned, we were in discussion with Jonathan Taylor, who's held in very high regard in UK in the training circuit and with various organisations in addition to schools. And his website gives very good advice. And he's actually going to be present in a future webinar that we've got. He's very keen to work with us on that, as he has in the past when he visited us in person. We'd like to think he'd be visiting us in person soon, but I think we'll have to wait a little bit longer for those days to come back. But more time online makes this question even more important, and your decision and the guidance that you take on it even more important. So please, Common Sense Media and Jonathan Taylor's website will provide you useful guidance toward games that can be played with friends online, confident that it is the friends and it's nobody other than that.
Thanks, Mr. Cowie. That's excellent. I'm going to head back to Mr. Gough now for the next question. And we're sort of slightly moving up the age groups now. And this is for the parent of an 11 and a 14-year-old. And this comes back to the risk from that age group, that sometimes that they are on chat groups that seem to be very, very toxic, people being unkind. What would your suggestion be in terms of dealing with that, and where would you go?
First of all, just in school, they have regular assemblies, well-being lessons that talk about this and talk about bullying online, talk about the effect of the written word in a message and the harm it can cause. And it's something that I continually talk to young people about, because it really worries me, the language that's being used in WhatsApp groups and messenger groups. So as a parent, it's about deconstruction, really. You've come across the language, you've seen that they're involved with this toxic group, or that you can see that they've been part of this. If they are mentioning words like bomb, kill, inappropriate words, or words that make you feel uncomfortable, you should say something about it. If it makes you feel uncomfortable, be open and honest, and question why they're using this word. Do they really know the impact of a bomb and killing, and the language they're using? And that I think is really crucial, especially the younger years. And then in terms of protecting them and conversation, but reiterating to them, you are taking part in a conversation that could ultimately be harming and really hurting psychologically another individual or individuals. And that is horrible. And that's clear cut. But again, back to digital tattoo, back to risks of other people finding out. Just to have that conversation and make them aware. With regards to telling them to stop or exit it, you can block them and tell them to come out of it, because I'm sure if they're innocent of not taking part in the horrible language or the horrible conversation, then they will want to come out of it and they should exit it. And then from a school perspective, dialogue with us does help, because we can help. We're not going to jump in, but we would certainly appreciate being aware of potential horrible groups going on or conversations going on, because as you know and we know, the online world means it could be happening in school, and it's very hard unless we have that dialogue with you as parents. We won't find that out. And not a clear-cut answer, but it is, again, you know, how much is your daughter, son taking part in the conversation? Do they know what the language is? Why are they using this medium to have that relationship with their peers? Can we, you know, meet up in real life? Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Gough. Mr. Cowie is going to take on the next question, which I know Mr. Gough's alluded to already, but this is from the parent of the 11-year-old about concerns about maybe dangerous behaviour, which is sort of boarding, you know, clips on TikTok. We know there's been various challenges recently, and just, yeah, the additional elements that go with it, from perhaps gaming online for a long period of time. So what would you advise to parents about that, Mr. Cowie?
Well, similar to what Mr. Gough outlined there are some of the challenge sites, some of the images that are projected that are dangerous. Pupils are pushed toward taking risks that they may not be aware of the consequences. Now, one thing that we do, when we do a survey, it's sometimes better, rather than saying, what are you doing online, to say, what are your friends doing that worry you, that concern you? So it's not intruding on anybody's personal space and experience, but it's giving them an opportunity to reflect on their friends and think they can look out for others. So that type of perception survey can be quite revealing. Now, we run it in terms of monitoring, assessing risk of whatever sites are out there, and there's always risks. It's just where you look that changes. But in terms of the risk to your children, it maybe the conversation is key. Having conversation, not making that conversation, don't do that, because to young people, don't do that, maybe interpreted as, try that out. Just give that a go and see what that's like. So it may have, in terms of unintended consequences, don't do that, may have exactly that effect. Whereas enabling them to express concern about friends and what the friends might be doing might give you more of an insight into what they're actually doing, but they're able to talk more openly about that. There's also the hearing what goes on in the back of the car when they're talking to friends about what they're actually doing online, and that'll give you an insight there. But I don't believe in banning things, because kids are smart and they'll find workaround. I think it's always best to educate and put them in a position where they think they are being trusted and they are in control of the decisions that will be made. Sometimes we do have to bring in filters and we do have to remove devices, but I'd look at that as a last resort. The first resort is education and raising their awareness of what consequences might be, exactly as Mr. Gough outlined there.
Thanks, Mr. Cowie. That's great. So we're now moving on to some of the concerns from parents from the senior school. And quite interestingly, one of the questions was, how would we suggest to deal with inappropriate content, putting personal values on followers, interactions, device addictions, and the fear that parents have of them missing out on real life? So I'm going to hand back to Mr. Gough for this one.
Okay, what I will say is I've done quite a lot of small courses, including psychological first aid and anxiety and depression and understanding the teenage brain. and they're really not long. They are easily accessible. I would absolutely recommend to any parent willing to sort of spend a couple of hours to learn about these things. It's so enlightening to read some of the material, listen, because they're very good courses. In terms of device addiction and missing out in real life, it is a huge concern seeing our teenagers being on their devices. And of course, and I've been reading about why we sleep, their circadian rhythm, they're designed to stay up later and get up later. They need to sleep, but sleep is really important. So with regards to using their device, if their behavior is concerning you as a parent, if they're behaving in a certain way, you have to question what it is they're doing. Is it because they've been on their device 3 hours in a row? And talk to them about how they feel after being on a device for 2 hours or gaming, and then get them to see that actually there is a link between gaming for 2 hours and their sort of anxious state afterwards, or their lack of patience. And as a parent, 14-year-old, 15-year-old, as they're getting older, you have to guide and release the reins, obviously. But I would say you've got to put the boundaries back in to support their well-being. If they are staying on a device up to 11 at night, that is just not going to help them sleep well. They need their sleep. They can stay up to 11 because, as I just said, they're designed to stay up to 11. But if they're on a device for 3 or 4 hours up to that point, they are going to struggle to sleep, and it will affect them. I know I'm not answering your questions precisely, but it's back to what Mr. Cowie said. It is about education. It's about talking to them. They have heard us, but they will be careless. They will make mistakes. So what we hope is that they will come to us or talk about it or have a support system so that they can cope when it does go wrong.
Thanks, Mr. Gough. We're going to head back to Mr. Cowie now, and we're going to wrap up with one of our last questions. We've got a couple more which we're going to run through very, very quickly. This is one of the questions that came up from a parent of a 16-year-old pupil. Now, obviously, they can receive invitations from strangers. They can get influenced by peers, and it leads to a certain type of behaviour and language and actions. What recommendations, what advice have we got to parents in terms of that conversation?
And with this, the conversation is having conversations with your child, whatever age they're at. And certain ages, it's a reluctant conversation. When they're 16 years old, they may not be particularly forthcoming, but have that conversation anyway, particularly when it's about influence of peers there and peer pressure. Just talking about what the friends are doing, what the year group are doing, what others are doing, what they believe the online behavior is, and just not letting it get excessive, not allowing large spells online. Can build addiction, but also can build distraction there and involvement in risk-taking that long-term can have very serious consequences. They will go on to chat rooms. They will meet strangers, but it's how they respond to those strangers. And the more time they spend chatting to them, the less of a stranger that person becomes, and the more they feel they may be developing a relationship with them. But they don't actually know who it is, because what they're communicating with is an online persona that can be very different from the individual concerned. Where that can be reined in and the risk reduced is by you just having conversations, keeping them grounded in reality, keeping them talking to actual people rather than thinking that a virtual online world is the norm. We're coming out of that stage post-lockdown, and the norm is chatting to actual people whilst using computer systems for the wonderful devices they can be. They can be great for communicating with people, but they're not something that is a friend to the individual and something we'd want pupils being dependent upon. So observing behavior of your children and saying, is that behavior changing? Because they may be feeling under pressure to do things that deep down they know they don't really want to, but they feel there may be pressure put upon them online to act in ways that they will regret at that time. And if they're doing it online, they're going to have their digital tattoo that they're going to be regretting it for the rest of their life. We do try and educate on that what's online stays online, but sometimes it can be difficult to get that across. It's much easier if they're used to talking about what they're doing online. That's what they do at home. That's what we'll do here. And we're following the best practice guidance that's very well given out by Common Sense Media and that you'll see on Jonathan Taylor's website.
That's great. Thanks for that, Mr. Cowie. So we've got 2 more questions, and we're going to aim to cover those reasonably quickly. Quite a long question, so I'll try and bridge it. But the main point here, really, from the parent of an 11-year-old, is that they have obviously been in lockdown. It's been a really important tool to engage with games and to enable people to socialise. And they're aware of Common Sense Media, but they're also aware that there's a lot of games coming online, and they really want that advice of how do they track it and where do they go with that. So I'm going to pass back to Mr. Gough for his thoughts on this one.
Okay, so I'm still learning in terms of Common Sense Media and reading up apps and the new games, and even there will be a game that isn't on Common Sense Media yet. In other words, it's so new. You've got those resources. Common Sense Media is excellent. Jonathan Taylor, we met the other week and we've mentioned him a few times. He's brilliant and he'll be great to have in this forum where we can chat openly. He was really good. So yeah, it's again having awareness of what they're doing in the game and chatting to them. Is it first person game? Are you playing socially with your friends, or are you playing with just online? It's again the security of these games. We are vulnerable, and your children are vulnerable, which is again why where they're playing the game. Are they in the bedroom unsupervised? All of that matters actually, because. And then the information, and Jonathan Taylor spoke about the young people are sharing their passwords crazily. They're spending money. They've been given credit card details to spend money on Fortnite. You do not need to spend money on, and the majority of the games you do not need to spend money. Your kids will definitely try and persuade you if they can buy something. Live streaming is becoming more and more popular. That makes our young very vulnerable. It can take the minutest of detail in the background to give away their location. You could say a bit of information and suddenly that opens them up to serious exploitation. Yes, it's possible, but we've got to, this is where supervising them and the space they're using it and how often they're using it. I mean, I am genuinely worried to hear that I've got year 7, year 8 staying up to 11 on their devices. And actually 1 o'clock I heard recently in the morning playing a game. And I wonder, where's the supervision? What's happening? Is he playing with friends, or is he playing just generally online? Is he addicted and wanting to win and get to another level? All those things are coming into my mind, and he's got school the next day. So it's and then the strangers is of course a risk, and Mr. Cowie alluded to that. It's a minefield, but I genuinely think Common Sense Media, Jonathan Taylor's website is excellent. by all means, communicate with us and ask us, and we will help. We will investigate. We will research. We're here to help.
Thanks, Mr. Gough. Excellent answer. I'm just going to take the last question, really, and it kind of hops on the back of what Mr. Gough's just said, and it's how to prevent children from logging into the wrong websites, and it's a parent of a 7-year-old. My personal opinion on this one is that 7-year-olds do use iPads for educational purposes at MCM. We are absolutely 100% aware of that. However, outside of the school time, I know that I have 2 boys who are 8 and 9. I have an older boy as well who's 18. But the boys, when they were 7, they were not allowed. I didn't allow them onto devices outside of school time. They didn't have free reign to access websites and to access the internet. We just didn't do it at all. We played games together. We spent a lot of time as a family. And I would really, really encourage that. There's plenty of time. There's the rest of their lives to play on devices. But I'd really, really encourage people, if their 7-year-olds are going to use any sort of device, then it would be with you and it would be supervised. That would be my strong advice on that one. Okay, that wraps us up in terms of today. We've probably gone on a little bit longer than planned, but thank you so much for being with us, and thank you so much for listening. I'd like to thank Mr. Cowie, Mr. Andy Gough, and for their input today. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact any of us from today. Please feel free to contact Mrs. Rachel Eaton-Jones or Mr. Nick Etoff, our heads of school as well, if you have any concerns about that. And once again, do be in contact with any questions that you may have. I know nothing's come up on the chat today, but hopefully we found a format whereby preloading the questions is going to get responses that people need. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you after the holiday, and we'll see you next half term.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye. 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 Bye.